Ladies and gentlemen, friends, colleagues and listeners, here we are again. We've got another podcast today, and I've got a gentleman on, Tom Fairbairn, and I'll introduce his title and his company in a minute, but it's a subject matter that's of real interest to me personally, and I'm sure many other people. And hopefully today, Tom's going to give us a little bit more insight than we normally would have covering these particular subjects. So, Tom, nice to see you, sir. And Tom represents a company called Solis, and he's got a wonderful title. So, Tom, Solis Distinguished Engineer.
Hey, hi there, Chris. Thanks for having me on the show. Yeah, distinguished engineer. What does that mean? Well, hopefully it doesn't just mean old, though potentially it does. But essentially what it means is I'm an engineer in the technology industry who's taking a bit more of a holistic view of the problems that organizations and industry face. So one of the things in, let's talk about aviation, for instance, is how do we get all these different organizations to collaborate together? How can they share that information in the best way so that they can optimize all of their operations, right? So that's kind of this idea is how do you get all these moving pieces to dance together in a way that benefits everyone, right? And adds value to everyone.
Exactly. Now, you just used a word there, which is something that's really, really dear to me, but also a little bit sensitive, which is the word collaboration. And I always bounce it back at people. I say, look, come on now, is it real or is it just rhetoric? Because so many people, and especially in our industry at the moment, and from, you know, authorities, regulators, representative bodies, it's all about collaborate, collaborate, collaborate. But then when it actually comes down to it, and to what degree and how open that information or the big data is, you know, people are still, you know, they're still protective and they don't want to share. They don't want to lose what they consider to be competitive advantage. But you know, I think it's a little bit like the Premier League, or, you know, once you're in the Premier League, you're in it. Now, let all the data be there, and it's what you do with it that gives you the benefits, whether it be commercial, product, or perception.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, Solis is a technology provider, right? So I can give organizations and industry an idea of how they might add value, but I'm not really in a position where I can say, you know, this, you're giving away some competitive advantage there. That's something you as an organization have to decide for yourself. What I can do is give organizations access to that data and give organizations the ability to control access to that data to whatever level you need to know. So maybe there's some information that you regard as sensitive, but other parts of that information isn't so sensitive and is very valuable as part of an ecosystem. Being able as a technology provider to give you access to the right pieces of information hopefully means that it kind of moves that collaboration idea along. So we can't say you have to do collaboration, but we can say, if you're going to do it, here's some of the tools that can help you do that in the best way possible, that hopefully you can go to your board and say, do you know what, the advantages of this outweigh the disadvantages.
And do you think, in general terms now, do you think people are aware or educated enough or familiar enough to be able to present something that makes most people understand? Because like parties where I've looked at, you know, when it comes to collaboration and they've got this hesitancy, it's normally because the people that the organizations rely on don't have enough knowledge themselves, and they're legacy practitioners, and they're used to doing certain things in a certain way, and they don't want to let it go. So it's a you know, it's a mindset change as well.
Well, yeah, that's part of my job, is to try and illuminate the ideas that can lead to this. So here's an example, right? We've had the lockdown, and before lockdown, I'll give you an example, a completely different industry. If you wanted to get a document signed at a solicitor's, say, I don't know, you're exchanging a house or something, what's the answer you get? The answer you get is, well, it's got to be, you've got to come to the office, I've got to see you, you've got to sign this particular piece of paper, it's all got to be bound up in a certain specific way by a very skilled individual. What happens now? They send you an email, they say, print out one copy, take a picture on your phone and send it back to me. Now, why have they done that? Well, because they've had to. It's as simple as that. They haven't been able to do business in any other way. So the idea here really is if we can show people what can be done, the value of doing things in new ways, the value, for instance, of people well, maybe people don't understand digital transformation, but they understand that it's building new business models. If they can see that they've got to keep up with that, otherwise they'll be left behind and possibly their business will disappear. Hopefully then they'll open their minds up to some of these new ways of doing things, like, for instance, sharing data in real time. So, part of this collaboration idea is that often the decisions you're trying to make are time critical. The aviation sector, probably one of the best examples of that, right? And these are time critical information. Like if you're trying to update an aircraft being on stand, estimated time versus its target time, there are regulations around this. If it varies by more than 15 minutes, you need to update people. And so there's not only this business pressure, but there's also regulatory pressure behind this too.
Yep. No, I totally agree. Now, you touched there again. You said have to. So this sort of fear leverage is something that should be bottled, or we need to have a formula so that you don't fear it when it's necessary. And that's, now how do you get around that? Because there's so many things that have happened in COVID, and especially from technology perspective, I don't know. I mean, you'd probably know better than me, but it's probably sped things up. I don't know, 10 years, 15 years, maybe, because of what people are having to do. And even, different generations now are doing things that they would never, ever have imagined. So that digital transformation journey and the understanding of, what is digitalization, digital transformation, the different understandings of a similar word, people are now starting to come to terms with it. But how do you mix up that have to and turn it into not just a want to, but a will do fast enough?
Yeah, it's about the value that you can provide. So let's imagine you're in a situation where a regulation says you have to exchange certain data with certain parties. If you start thinking about that a bit more, okay, so you've got this idea that you're exchanging the same information with these parties that you have to exchange the information for. Well, if you take a step back, you can start thinking about, well, clearly that data has value.
Yep.
So maybe there's other parties that are interested in that data that are going to be willing to pay for it. And now you get into this idea of a digital product where, okay, so you've had to exchange some information, but maybe there's these other parties that might be interested in it. Another approach to this is to look at the whole operational efficiency side of things. So we're exchanging data about how quickly we can, if you think about it, how quickly and how accurately we're predicting our aircraft departure times. Now imagine if you could take that into an analytics space. So what we're talking about in analytics, generally, not exclusively, but generally, is you're taking a big lump of data and feeding it to some algorithm, generally in a cloud environment somewhere, that's going to crunch all these numbers and say, do you know what? Stupid example, but for some reason, every Tuesday at 11 o'clock, there's a noticeable bump in departure times. And that can give you insights, obviously. Well, okay, what happens on Tuesdays at 11 o'clock? Oh, it's a shift change with a certain, the gate operating staff, for instance. So, actually, I can increase my predictability and increase my operational efficiency as a consequence of having to share some information as part of an industry initiative or some regulation, for instance.
Yep.
So I think it's about seeing beyond what you have to do and looking at how you can use this data in a broader context. What other players might be interested in it? What can you do with this data to analyze it and get insights into what your business is doing?
Okay, right. Yeah, no, got that. So now data, and everybody keeps talking now about big data, being the next oil or the next special metal or whatever it is. Which makes sense, that's fair enough. And the operational efficiency makes a big bit of sense there. Now, the thing that I always remember is whenever you used to check in, the poor agent there, you know, whether it be a he or a she, they'd say, well, I'm sorry, sir, but the flight's closing. And then you get people, and myself, I used to be probably the worst. I'd say, look, it's all right, don't worry, I can run, I can get to the gate, but please, you know, because I was always like, you know, last minute. And they'd say, well, you know, we can't guarantee. I said, don't worry, I'll do it. And then you'd have to talk your way through all the rest and get up the front of the queue for security. You cause all this disruption for everybody, and you shouldn't be doing it. Well, then with the tickets, when you check in now, they don't have to say anything. You can plead as much as you like. And they say, well, I'm very sorry, sir, but as soon as you scan your boarding pass, it will tell you that, sorry, you can't go through because there isn't enough time. So that human interaction or pressure or leverage is taken. And that was because somebody decided, right, from such and such a date, this is the way it's going to be.
Mm-hmm.
But there seems to be so many ifs and ands and buts and whens and whys with people who are on the collaboration table, but they don't actually bring their own knife and fork to the table. They just sit there and watch what others are doing. They're not willing to do it. So, you know, this pressure or this fear is something that hasn't sped up as fast as the digital transformation during COVID times. Now, from a what do you think is the main reason? And another thing that you've got in your bio is evangelizing.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So how would you now preach, or how would you give a gospel of common sense to these people who just, you know, they don't see, they see more excuses for not doing something than benefits to do it.
Yeah. So that's a great example. So what you've done there, operational efficiency, I can take people out of the equation, so I save labor.
Yep.
Hopefully I'm getting people through the airport more quickly because they're just scanning a barcode. But so that's kind of the first layer of this digital transformation journey. But what you're doing there is you're looking at it as an efficiency process view. What you need to do is back out a bit and think about what you can do from a value point of view. So what is your value as an organization of turning people away at the check-in desk, right? There's absolutely no value in that at all. You're irritating your customers.
Yep.
So if you think about it then, from that kind of point of view, well, okay, I've got an awful lot of data on Chris. I know he's going to turn up, you know, right on the limit of time. And I can use my analytics, my big data to get that information about specific customers. I'm already doing that because that's how I'm selling you more efficiently on your ticket prices. So let's think about this a bit more holistically now. Well, do you know what? I could start sending Chris notifications on his boarding app to say, hey, Chris, you need to be, you need to be leaving for the airport now. You're probably going to wait another 15 minutes, but actually you want to get there more quickly. Tell you what, how about this? Maybe if you get there 15 minutes ahead of your normal time, I'll give you a few extra loyalty points. Now, what that does is it increases the reach of your loyalty program, because it's surprising. There isn't much loyalty stuff you actually have to give people to nudge them in the right direction, especially when they've got the idea that actually they probably should be doing that anyway. And being able to engage with customers more, that regular notification thing, hopefully you're turning it from a, oh God, I've got to do a business flight, I'm going to get there as late as possible. You're turning it into something that's a bit more interactive.
Yeah.
So how about, how about you come to the lounge and read a paper and get a coffee or get a beer or a glass of wine before you get on the flight, just to nudge people in that right direction. That's going to help you with your customer engagement. It's going to make your customers more loyal, and in that process, drive value rather than as a kind of beat you with a stick. You've got to get there on time, or I'm going to punish you for not being there on time, right?
Another thing that you just done there is, well, I used to watch so many people, and that's what you do at airports, isn't it? Or where there's loads of people, and you see them running down, and they're flying away, and you think, my God, they must be so stressed out.
Yep.
So equally, if it was able to link to wellness as well, there's an opportunity there, because everybody says health is wealth, and if you tend to look after yourself, you look after a lot more elements around your life as well.
Well, I mean, an interesting thing about the running idea there that you mentioned is a lot of that stress is uncertainty.
Yeah.
I'm running because I don't know how long the security line is.
That's it. That's it. Yeah.
Well, imagine if you're sharing security line data with boarding data, boarding app data, you can say, Chris,
8 minutes. Yeah.
The line's like 12 minutes and you've got 15, you really need to hurry. Or, hey, Tom, the line's 5 minutes and you got 15 minutes, relax, take it easy, Yeah. That would make the whole flying experience that much better for the customers, right?
Yeah. And then coming back to the fear element again, and I went up to London for a meeting with a colleague of mine, and it's a really nice restaurant, lovely restaurant, nice ambience, music, food's great and everything. But when we were waiting in there, it had facial recognition. And the curtain was open, so you could see it on the main screen. You could see it zooming in on our faces and everything. Now, it didn't bother me, but one of the guys that was in our group said, I don't like that. And I said, well, you want to stay away from London then, because London is probably the most CCTVs or anywhere, any city in the world. But a lot of people don't like that. So you know what I'm saying? Even the point of, if people were able to identify your location in an airport and then say that from where you are, it's normally recommended 10 minutes to the boarding gate, but because of where you are, it's going to be 18 minutes and you've only got 20 minutes before we close the flight. How do you overcome that fear of feeling that people are watching you, or that they're always on top of you with this big data?
Yeah, so I think there are two elements to that. I think what the experience of mobile phones has taught us is that actually, for a little bit of convenience, it's surprising how much information you'll give away.
Yep.
So it's about making sure that I, as a customer, get enough value out of sharing my data that I'm willing to do it. And secondly, is the classic consent argument, right? So simple thing of, if you share your location with me, you might have more time in your lounge or in the shops. Would you like to do that?
Yeah, and then it's just numbers and volumes, and those that don't will always be a smaller minority and a loud minority, but they've got every right to do that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm a technologist and I have these fears. There's a lot of services that I don't enable precisely because I don't see enough value in them to give away that kind of data about me. There are other services where actually, do you know what? It's convenient. The convenience that I've got, yeah, I'll give you my location. As long as I can do that as long as I don't have the feeling that somebody's trying to trick me into it, I think is the key there.
And then again, now you've used another word there several times, value. And when you look at products and you look at services now, there's only two real ways. It's either value or volume. And if you're going for a value product, then you expect more information, more guidelines, more benefits, etc. And if it's volume, then it's basic, boom, that's it. So it's a little bit like air travel. So you look at somebody that's really successful at the moment in the volume side of things. You've got Ryanair, you've got Wizz Air. I mean, they're doing tremendously well, but they have to have so many aircraft, and it's all about volume. And then you look at people who are aiming to become value, yet they give far too much away for free because of pressure and because of competition and the way the markets are going, etc. And so that's causing more problems, because some of the areas, especially now in aviation, you cut back on your costs because you've had to give away something on your value product. So then training gets affected, or the number of people. Now, the people and the training get affected before the benefits come in of digital transformation. And then people fear digital transformation because they see it as somebody losing jobs. And a classic example was, all the press took great coverage of when a small supermarket was unmanned, and you went in and everything. But then people were automatically saying, but what about the people on the tills losing their jobs? But if it's being run properly, they've got a better chance of doing a better, more interesting job because of keeping all the shelves, stocked, making it look good, freshness, etc. So if that, and again, it comes back to that fear, how do people get better educated along this digital transformation journey so that they start to be more supporters and enablers rather than blockers and people who shy away from it? I think that's where you know, maybe somebody like yourself and evangelizing and architecting, but you know, how do you convert the languages and all the specifics into something that people can really start to see and appreciate? And maybe even it should be taught differently in schools, so people from a very early age understand all of these benefits, and it's not just someone's going to take my mum and dad's job away if I hear the word digital transformation or, you know, anything like that. So it's a much bigger picture, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I mean, it's funny enough, I was talking with some friends the other day. Do you remember what it was like when you used to go and visit somewhere that you hadn't been before and you were driving, right?
Yep.
Especially in London, you'd get your
Yep.
A to Z out.
Yeah.
And you'd have to plan the journey in advance.
Yep.
And you wouldn't know what the traffic was like.
Yep.
And so these days I don't even look at a map before I leave. I've got it in my pocket, right?
Yep. It's incredible.
So
and has saved so many divorces, or have allowed people to get married earlier than they would have done.
Yeah, exactly. So that's an example of the kind of digital transformation thing. So if we go back to your example of you know, the kind of check-in process. As a check-in agent,
yep,
what's the best part of the job for you? Is it scanning somebody's passport and printing out a boarding pass? Not really.
Should be interaction with the customer.
Exactly, right? So if you could focus on that interaction more and helping the customer, maybe they're a nervous flyer, maybe there's you can, you know, kind of adopt them onto the you know, the nervous flyer program, reassure them, maybe they've got a problem with a connection. It's about elevating service from a process to a personal interaction that you enjoy and builds value for your company, right? And if you look at service industries as a whole, that is going to be more the direction we're going in. So at the moment, we're going through this, well, we've probably gone through this whole kind of depersonalization of transactions.
Yeah.
I don't go into a bookshop, pull a book off the shelf as much anymore. I type in a web address, search for the book, find the cheapest price and press a button. But the bookshops have survived is in creating an environment where I enjoy the interaction of the whole process.
Yep.
Right? Yep. So if you apply that to aviation, me as a business customer trying to get to a business meeting and I'm a little bit late, I want to avoid the interactions because I want to be as quick as possible. On the way back, when I'm nice and relaxed, maybe I've had a glass of red wine in the restaurant on the way back, right now I'm willing to talk to people and I can find out, oh, you know, maybe it might be better to book a different flight or, you know, all this kind of thing. That's where the extra value comes from, both from me as a customer, but also from me as somebody in the service industry, right? Now, how we go about education on that, I don't know. I mean, you can go all the way back to the Luddites and their kind of inevitability of change and how at first it was bloody awful with the Industrial Revolution. But actually we got to the point now where, you know, we're kind of lucky. It's bringing us a lot of benefits. I don't know. But I think there is an element here of the inevitable march of technology and how you as a customer, as a consumer, or as an employee deal with that inevitable march, right? You mentioned there about, obviously there's a lot of probably, I'm guessing, middle ranking air carriers that are under incredible margin pressure. They're under volume margin pressure from below, and they're under value margin pressure from above, right? Generally, I think it's true to say that just by cutting margins, as you mentioned the example of training and safety, for instance, cutting those to the bone, you're just racing to the bottom there. And people who are more used to optimize, you know, operational efficiency, making people stand in the corridor instead of giving them a gate lounge, they're going to win that battle. So it's more about how can you use that technology to bring you some extra value to those customers who are willing to pay a little bit more, obviously, otherwise they wouldn't have picked you in the first place. So how can you make that sticky? How can you give them things that reassure them that they've made the right choice there? Right?
No, 100% agree. And something else now, if you take that same train of thought and you look at how do certain parties differentiate. So at the moment now, everybody was, and they still are skeptical. I've flown lots of times now, and you can see the people that are really frightened still. You can see the people that get upset if they hear somebody cough 10 meters away, and you know they're coming out of the toilet and they're holding their arm like this and they're pulling the handle, and you know so. But it's great. Hygiene is a big issue now. But to get the consumer confidence back, there's been a lot of like awards for hygiene and things like that, trying to bring people's attention to it. But I now genuinely, especially from the sector that I've been in, which is cargo, which has come to a lot more light, where people have realized that to keep the world going in the worst pandemic or whatever, you've got to have logistics and you've got to have supply chain. So now people are taking more interest in it. I think this is a wonderful opportunity now, because it's when things happen that you least expect, gives you the opportunity to turn that have to fear into want to capability. And I think now airports themselves, this is a chance now for airports to start future proofing, because this won't be the last pandemic. It won't be the last major thing as a disruptor to international and global business. There's going to be so many things now coming around quicker and quicker, and we have to be a lot more agile and be able to pivot easier to adapt to these things. But I think it gives a chance now for airports to really have a digital transformation drive, plus a facilities, so that they actually build new facilities to certain criteria where there's solar panels to cut down on costs, etc., and also to be more greener or more towards the planet. Now, for me, this is a perfect time for people to start to differentiate, because of their embracing or listening to an evangelist or an architect and saying, do you know something, we now need to start looking to the next 15, 20, 25 years and start doing it now. Because if we don't do it now, we're going to be teaching ourselves lessons like we are now with the climate issues, and now how everybody has jumped on board a little bit too quickly without realizing, the three fundamentals, whether it's people, planet, the one that really influences everything is profit. If you haven't got the money, you're not going to be able to help with any of those other issues, which is why, I don't know, 10 or 11 of the worst polluting cities in the world are areas that are having troubles in that category. So do you think now, like teaming up with an organization like Solace or whatever, with an airport who want to do that, who could actually influence their own ecosystem within the next decade or so, do you think that's the right way to go forward? Or
yeah, definitely. I mean, let me give you a different example of that. You look at you mentioned freight and supply chain, right? Let's not forget aviation is a absolutely key part of supply chains. An example of that is big consumer goods company like Unilever, for instance. We talk about operational efficiency, and we tend to think of it as just you're making extra profit. Well, no, it's not. If you can avoid flights, if you can deal with flight delays a lot more efficiently, think of the impact that has on your carbon footprint. I would eliminate your carbon footprint, but it's certainly going to reduce a lot of that impact there. An example from Unilever, for instance, is where they were optimizing their shipping. This is actually on ships, and they were able to save large amounts of money and large amounts of carbon by more efficiently scheduling when their ships come into port, as an example. And obviously, aviation has led that in a large way. We talk about Eurocontrol, talk about airport CDM, for instance, as a way of doing that. But back to that supply chain use case, the impact of aviation here could be a lot greater, I think, than a lot of people give credit for, because one of the things that the whole pandemic has exposed is just how tight our just-in-time supply chains are. And the slightest disruption of that kind of ripples out through the supply chain. Now, obviously, if you're doing air freight, the chances are you're in amongst the tightest supply chains possible. If you're shipping roses in from Kenya or something, air freighting them in, they've got to be on, say, your supermarket within hours, right? So even the slightest disruption to that supply chain has big impacts going forward. So you go back to the fear factor. So what aviation can do here is imagine a situation where your carrier, your freight carrier, is able to send updates as they happen to other parties in the supply chain. So rather than just okay, what's the status of my freight, well, I'll tell you what, I'll tell you when it's left, and I'll tell you when it's arrived at the airport. Imagine being able to say, even mid-flight, there's a delay here. If you think about the ripple-on effects of that, well, obviously at the airport level, wouldn't it be nice to make sure that my logistics operators are aware of that, so they're not on airport quickly and clogging up the airport? The logistics operators, well, I can reassign my lorries, and for instance, to be more efficiently used. So this whole operational efficiency is a real ripple effect throughout the supply chain. Now, from an airline's point of view, from an aviation point of view, how do I use that to add value? Well, if you think about it a bit differently, your customer is not the logistics operator, but you've got data that's of real value to them. And if you can get that data to them as it happens in real time, well, they're going to be really interested in that, and they're not going to do it out of fear. They're going to do it because they can bring better operational efficiency and delight their end customers much more than they would be able to otherwise. So you can sell them that data, and that's value that you can get. So you've gone from a situation where you've gone, I've got a delay, I've got to tell my airport logistics provider about whatever, to a situation where you're actually selling that value to them.
And I think something like my daughter and my wife, I joke with them. I say, every time I go to the front and open the gates or whatever, there's an ecom vehicle there saying, oh, how's Kathy today, or how's Gabby today, because they're so used to dropping off parcels, but that e-commerce and that is so good. You know what I'm saying? You do it, it's going to come. It comes when you expect it to come. You can track it. Mm-hmm. Now, a lot of the legacy businesses, they didn't keep up with that.
Yeah,
and so why?
Yeah, fear of change maybe, and again, it's that fear factor, and also not being able to see the value of it, right? So the classic thing is some poor logistics driver trying to get into an airport, having to hold over multiple bills and to get through. I would have thought it's obvious that if you could automate all of that, it's better for the airport, and it's better for the logistics operator, and it's going to encourage more air freight. Yeah,
no, I agree.
Yeah,
I agree. And then it comes back to this collaboration. So in aviation, you've got so many governments, you've got so many carriers, you've got so many parties, and to get everybody to agree to something is an awful lot of nothing, because somewhere, and it comes down to this, like this pandemic, you have to do things. So many of the modifications, upgrades, improvements, innovations that happened because of people having to think logically and having to do things smarter, that really made that, that push. And I just hope that keeps going now, because if it doesn't, we're just going to hover in this sort of like zone where, we know things could and should be done better, but we don't actually drive them because nobody's making us until the next one comes along, which in my opinion, I think cybersecurity is going to be a huge problem for a lot of companies.
Yeah, I mean, there's several interesting ideas there. One of the barriers to all of this has been, how do I actually exchange this information? So what often you see is, we're going to do this transaction digitally, when what it actually ends up with is somebody's taken a picture of a document with it and sent it to you over an email, right? That's not digital transformation, right? If we start to think about this instead as an automated process where I select what information I want to share with you, and I select even to the point of being able to say, well, actually, you're going to have to pay for this information, but that information I'm going to give to you anyway. And you're able to select precisely exactly what information you're willing to expose to other people. I think that changes the viewpoint on it completely.
Yeah.
We're now no longer looking, you have to not look at it as, how am I going to take this existing process and make it a bit more automated? You have to look at it in terms of how can this business transaction as a transaction, not as a business process, but as a transaction, work better.
Yeah.
And, you know, the key points to this are often time. So how do I get access to the data when it happens? They're often around security, as you mentioned. How can I make sure that I only share the data of interest and not expose other data? And around collaboration, how do I make sure that it's easy technically for people to share data? And this comes down to this, if we look at this time-based aspect of it, a big trend in the technology industry is this movement to what we call event-driven. What's an event? Well, it's just a change of interest. So we talked about aircraft on stand, right? Notification, that's an event, right? Yeah. If you talk about logistics lorry arriving at the airport gate, ready to get on the airport, that's an event. And if we start thinking about sharing information as it happens as events, rather than a document, it becomes much more interesting then, because it's not a document you've got to carefully format and sign off. It's a statement of something that has happened that might be of interest to you. Yep. So if you want that statement of change, that event, well, you just what we call subscribe to it, and you just get that event to you as it happens. Yeah. Rather than me sending you an email with a document saying, oh, your lorry's arrived, which is a whole load of manual processing, right?
Okay, that's what we were talking about a little bit earlier about the pub sub, yeah?
Yes, so pub sub, it's nothing to do with drinking. I wish it was. It can be sometimes, depends how you play it. But it's this idea of publish, subscribe. So you can imagine me as in your freight forwarding case, for instance, imagine me being able to say to a logistics provider, there's an event, your freight shipment, the aircraft has just landed. Well, that enables me to do a lot more planning now, rather than waiting for it to be in customs, for instance, or customs ready. I can say, I'm expecting that because of the analytics I've done of all these previous events. I'm expecting that to take, on average, I don't know, 24 hours plus or minus 8 hours, so I can start planning my scheduling for the next day with much more accurate and up-to-date information.
Which is what our industry is overrun with platforms and programs and IT systems and then I think one of the ailments of that is once they go through the RFI RFP process and they then request what they call super users from the company, and they're obviously people who've got an IT bias and then what they do is they create aliens, because these super users no longer talk a language that the rest of the practical guys do and understand. So you alienate them, it takes too long, and then when the eventual system starts rolling out, things have changed, so it's not dynamic enough. Whereas I think now they have to approach it in a much more dynamic, and they have to be able to communicate, they have to be able to take on board sometimes plug and play systems and off the shelf systems. So whether or not APIs are effective and how do they transfer the information, that's all becoming a lot more fluid now, and people are appreciating what's involved, and the more understanding from the practical person who has to do the job, that also cuts away some of that fear as well.
Yeah, I mean, from a technology point of view, how do we address that? Well, it's this shift to as a service. We call it as a service, right? So no longer are you having to issue a massive RFI on how am I going to install this, where it's going to run, who's going to run it, are you going to give me services to build big, thick, flipping manuals that's got to sit on somebody's desk. It's becoming much more dynamic now, and this is where cloud computing can help, because you can create services in the cloud that mean you can concentrate on the business, that value that service enables you to do, that technical capability. So a good example of that is these cloud services are great collaboration platforms. Because they're a constrained environment that multiple people can access. And what's more, if you use something like Solis, you've got this great ability of being able to have a distribution layer that's based inside your IT, in your data center or something, that can then communicate directly with a collaboration platform that's, say, up in the cloud somewhere. And that means that you've got these linkages between different parts of different organizations, right? And that's what collaboration is all about after all. But then that leads you on to, inside your organization, how can you improve collaborations between different business units, right? So, you know, I mentioned earlier the example of loyalty programs. Wouldn't it be much better to get them much more integrated with the rest of your operations?
Yeah, no, definitely.
Yeah, and you know, again, let's not forget freight. How can we analyze our freight journeys and analyze which of our freight paths provide the most value to customers? Which of our, you know, if there's a problem with the freight, either it's damaged or there's a delay, which one of those cause the most problems for customers? So I need to avoid the most.
No. It's, and it's, you know, it's simple and it's logic, but it just keeps happening. And I think there's a little bit of a tug of war going on at the moment now, because it's happening more because you've got less people are coming back off furlough, lack of training, anxieties, all sorts of things now that the new leader is going to have to address as they move forward, which is why you need more intelligence, you need more big data, you need more guidance as to what you should be doing and what you shouldn't be doing. So it's ever more important now. Now, just as we come near the end of the podcast, Tom, do you just want to tell me now, if I had to go out there and look at organizations to help me, and who should there be? And there's a plethora of options. Why Solis?
So, well, expertise. So expertise in the aviation industry as well. I don't know if you've ever flown in the US, so I imagine you have.
Oh, yes.
You're probably aware of SWIM data, so the FAA System-Wide Information Management, right? That's all running over Solis. So if you start up your flight tracker app and you start looking at the locations of aircraft in real time, that's all being transmitted over a Solis infrastructure.
Okay. Right. Okay.
So that gives you an idea of the kind of information that you can share and the scale at which you can do this. So why Solis? Well, we're experts at looking at things from this event-based approach. So customers checked in, aircraft on stand, boarding complete. These kind of things are the lifeblood of what we enable for customers, right? And one of the things that we're really doing now with Solis is you mentioned this fear versus kind of you know, value base of it. What we're really doing now is taking these events and bundling them up as digital products that you can sell to other parties. And it's moving from that, I need to do this from an operational efficiency point of view, which there's still a lot that can be done, right? But that only gets you so far. But if you can move to a point where you're able to share this information as a product, that makes it easier to understand, it makes it easier to consume, and it gives you that ecosystem effect of being able to bring other players into this exchange of events.
Okay. Yeah. So instead of everybody just thinking it makes you either faster from an efficiency perspective or with fewer people or whatever, it's now an end user benefit.
Yeah, that's right. It's enabling you as an organization or as industry to do things that previously were very hard or almost impossible. Yeah.
And don't you agree, Tom, that if now people start to do it in the right order, it then doesn't have such a big or a negative impact on the people that were doing a job that's being replaced or modified, or, you know, but I think it's when it goes in the wrong order that it causes that additional fear or rejection or barrier.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure about order. What I would say is the magnitude of change and its direction, right? So a perfect example is Heathrow Terminal 5 opening up, and they've got the completely new baggage handling system that nobody understood, and it was dropping bags everywhere. Very unfortunate occurrence, right? Well, personally through my career, I've always found better is if it's rather than doing a huge, big bang, we call it change, it's usually more efficient, easier to justify, and less risky if you do things as a migration, as a gradual change. Now, we're not talking about something as kind of an evolution, as a kind of gently bumping along in the right direction. We're talking about a conscious change in the right direction, but that is done at the points where there's the most value at that given point, and gradually expanding out from there, right? Now, if you do it that way, you mentioned the example of people whose jobs have changed. Well, instead of them walking into work one day and doing one job one way and the next day they're doing the job a different way, they're migrating too.
Yes.
And as a result, they're more likely to A, accept the change because it's less big, and B, they're more likely to see the benefits of it and look forward to the, the migrations as they continue on.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. That the Big Bang Theory, there's been so many examples, and you wonder, why does history repeat itself? You mentioned T5, same thing happened at Barajas in Madrid, and there's loads of hubs, where they went for a big bang and crazy. But the migration also, it's not just about the value, but it brings credibility to the workers and the practical people. And when I'm talking about the order, what I'm saying is, if somebody can actually see that by doing something in a certain way it's going to be beneficial, then they can appreciate that it's not necessarily about losing positions or jobs, it's about differentiating them and putting them in a different direction, because there's other things people can do. It doesn't always mean that just because you pick the bottle up like this, that you can't pass it this way and move it on. And I think now individuals are starting to realize that they need to look at themselves as a value. So anything they can do to enhance their own personal value, so whether it's upskilling, new skilling, cross-skilling, reskilling, you should do as much as you can, because the more flexible you are, or the more agile you are, the easier it is to fit into most environments.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a good point there, Chris, that probably kind of more fits the evangelization point of view here. Is there are people in companies like mine that are able to do these technological changes, but what there seems to be, where people can really add value is in your current organization. If you can help that that change, your company is going to value you. And that means that when the next change comes along, and it's going to happen,
look to you straight away.
They'll look to you. And even if you look at this more broadly as a workforce, if you're more flexible, you're more likely to be in the succeeding company, and you're more likely to have a valuable job, rather than in a company where you're gradually getting squeezed out and your job is getting worse every day. So, I mean, to everybody in the aviation industry, that's kind of a rallying cry, actually. There is a lot of work we can do here to make the whole of aviation, and where it fits into the broader industry, the broader ecosystem. We talked about logistics, for instance. There's a lot you can do here to help with this change to a more integrated technological environment.
And it's and I think it's also, there's so many things now that are having to be thought of from teachers in schools. So many. It's such a complex thing now. I don't know how they do it, but I think something else that needs to be is some old values. Don't stay still because you're a sitting target. You've got to keep moving, and some people have got this thing that, if they do a job and they can have a rest, then why would somebody then come and say, well, now you need to do something else? I think people have got to start understanding that you've got to keep learning, you've got to keep developing, you've got to keep moving forward. And that's something that's so important to be taught with, on top of, or in tandem or parallel with the digital transformation. Now, just before we finish, Solace, something that I love, which I've seen, was the surfboard with the cool cat, or the tiger with the sunglasses. You're never too cool to learn about the event-driven future.
Yep.
So good T-shirt or baseball cap, that one. So it looks good. He's a cool dude. So yeah. Tom, listen, thank you so much for your time. It's gone a lot faster, a lot quicker than I thought it would. And I thank you for the way you've enlightened a subject matter that most people either shy away from, or those that understand are few and far between. So thank you very, very much for sharing that. And good luck to you and to Solis. And look forward to speaking in the future.
Lovely, Chris. Thanks a lot. It's been fascinating.